everyone. I'm Miri Pomerantz Dauber from Jewish Book Council, and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's discussion. As always, we're so appreciative of you joining us here. This is the first in a series of events around the spring 2020 Natan Notable Book winner, The Seventh Heaven, Travels Through Jewish Latin America by Ilan Stavans, and is being sponsored by Jewish Book Council, Natan Fund, and the Yiddish Book Center. Our mission at Jewish Book Council is to educate and enrich the community through Jewish literature. Visit jewishbookcouncil.org to learn about JBC's reviews, essays, literary journal Paper Brigade, our book club resources, author tours, and of course, our literary awards. A word of thanks to our panelists, Ray Suarez and Ilan Stavans. We're looking forward to learning from you today. And to our audience, we hope you'll support today's authors by purchasing a copy of their books using the links in our chat. So you can open your chat box and find out more information. And thank you to our partners at Natan Fund and Yiddish Book Center. You'll hear more about Natan in a minute, but if you don't know about the Yiddish Book Center, it's a wonderful not-for-profit organization working to recover, celebrate, and regenerate Yiddish and modern Jewish literature and culture. The center is co-sponsoring this program as part of its new initiative, the Decade of Discovery, which is designed to foster a deeper understanding of Yiddish and modern Jewish culture. You can learn more about the center's work and upcoming virtual public programs at yiddishbookcenter.org. If any of you in the audience would like to share your own questions during the talk, you're more than welcome to. Please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Also, on the top right of your screen, you have the option to view the discussion in gallery or speaker mode, so please choose whichever one you prefer. And now I'd like to introduce Adina Poupko, Associate Director of Natan, who will tell you more about Natan Notable Books and about today's panelists.
Great, thank you, Miri. I'm so glad to be here to introduce our excellent speakers today. Before I do so, let me just say a few words about Natan and the Natan Notable Book Award. Ilan Stavans' The Seventh Heaven is the Spring 2020 Natan Notable Book, joining a growing list of distinguished works like Barry Weiss's How to Fight Anti-Semitism, Matti Friedman's Spies of No Country, Susie Linfield's In the Lion's Den, Jeremy Dauber's Jewish comedy, A Serious History, and Ari Shavit's My Promised Land. Natan is a venture philanthropy fund and a giving circle. Our members invest their philanthropic dollars in cutting-edge, emerging nonprofit organizations in Israel and in Jewish communities around the world as a way of engaging more people in Jewish life, helping Jewish communities to innovate and adapt to new opportunities and challenges, and building a strong state of Israel and connecting people to it in authentic and meaningful ways. Usually we do this through giving to nonprofit organizations, but a few years ago, we branched out into the world of written ideas by creating a book award in partnership with the Jewish Book Council. Twice a year, Natan Notable Books recognizes recently published or soon to be published nonfiction books that promise to catalyze conversations aligned with the themes of Natan's grantmaking. Professor Stavans' beautiful book brings the conversation of Jewish identity outside the borders of North America and Israel, introducing readers to Jewish immigrants, cultures, traditions, and communities across Latin America. Our goal is to catalyze conversations about the diversity of the Jewish people, especially at a time when diversity is very much a part of public conversation, and to highlight the ever-evolving experiences of Jews in different parts of the world with their neighbors. Today's conversation will allow us to dive into one of the many themes of the book, the relationship between Jews and their neighbors, and in particular, the similarities, differences, and overlapping experiences of Jewish and Latino immigrants. Just as diversity is a topic on everyone's mind today, so is immigration. And I know the conversation between our two excellent speakers will touch on many of the most pressing issues of our time. Let me introduce them to you briefly, and then I will let them take it away. Ilan Stavans is the Lewis Sebring Professor of Humanities, Latin American, and Latino Culture at Amherst College, the publisher of Restless Books, and the host of the NPR podcast, In Contrast. His many books include the Oxford Books of Jewish Stories, the memoir On Borrowed Words, and Spanglish, The Making of a New American Language, the 3-volume set of Isaac Bashevis Singer, The Collected Stories, and many, many more. The recipient of numerous prizes, his work has been translated into 15 languages and adapted into film, TV, theater, and radio. Ray Suarez is a host of the radio and podcast series World Affairs, a Washington reporter for Euronews. He recently completed an appointment as the McCloy Visiting Professor of American Studies at Amherst College. He has previously hosted and participated in shows like Inside Story, PBS NewsHour, and Talk of the Nation. Suarez is the author of 3 books, Latino Americans, The 500-Year Legacy That Shaped a Nation, The Old Neighborhood, What We Lost in the Great Suburban Migration, and The Holy Vote, The Politics of Faith in America. We are so pleased to have Ilan and Ray with us today, and we're grateful to all of you for being with us, for it promises to be a fascinating conversation. You can take it away.
Thanks, Adina. I'm so grateful to be asked to be the interlocutor today with my friend Ilan, and it gave me the opportunity to read this book and also consider the emanations and parallels, such as they are, in American life. This is part travelogue, part anthropology, part linguistic journey, and has a parallel in the American experience. And Ilan, I wanted to talk to you about the intersection of what I sometimes think of as intimate strangers, because the Jewish and Latino experience in the United States has a lot of similarities with immigration and assimilation. It is largely a metropolitan experience, a heavily urban experience when you talk about both people. But because it happens at different times, a lot of Latinos have very limited contact with American Jewry. And when I think about growing up in Brooklyn in the 60s and 70s, storekeepers, landlords, not always the most felicitous contacts, but they knew each other and they passed each other and they shared urban experiences. And there are similarities in Chicago, in Boston, in Baltimore, in various places around the country where, because the time setting is different, the experience is slightly different. And, you know, even ironically, in a lot of places, Latinos are living in places where Jews used to live, but they are cheek by jowl and still pretty unfamiliar.
It's a joy, Ray, to be in this conversation with you. I am thrilled always to see you, and I want to thank all the organizers for the opportunity to engage in this conversation. Intimate strangers is a very powerful way of putting it. There is an anachronism in the relationship between the two words. If you are a stranger, how can you be intimate, and vice versa? The relationship between Jews and Latinos in the United States it's quite a complex one, in a laborious, labyrinthine, fascinating one. At first sight, one would get the impression that there are many more, at least for some of us, there are many more Jews in the United States than Latinos, if one looked at media or at politics and so on. The proportion, however, is in the other direction. There are roughly 60 million Latinos in the United States, whereas depending on how you count, there are between 6 and 7 American Jews, that is Jews that at least identify, a million, that at least identify themselves as such. Although if you talk about assimilation, acculturation, transculturation, however you want to talk it, maybe the number goes much higher to 10 million or beyond. These two communities have been together in history. They have shared same territories. They have very similar traditions. However, because of the different points of arrival that they have had to the United States, in the different ways that that arrival has taken place, there is often that sense of strangeness, of a lack of intimacy, as you were describing. The very foundation of New York City, for instance, was by Portuguese Jews that went from Brazil up to what was then New Amsterdam. The early settlers in the United States had also some ancestry, whenever coming from Latin America, that had much to do with the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492. That expulsion is crucial to understand the Jews of Latin America. There are roughly three lines or ways of immigration to Latin America by Jews. The 1492 is the first and decisive one. When Columbus sailed the ocean blue, he was looking for an alternative route to India, but he was also probably looking for ways to open up the fields to the suffocating experience that Jews had in the Iberian Peninsula under the Spanish Inquisition. And the expulsion brought along an entire line of hidden Jews that in the United States in particular, when we talk about New Mexico, Nevada, Arizona, Utah, has a very important role to play. Crypto-Jews, conversos, so-called Marranos, in Hebrew, Anusim, have been within the texture of those societies for a long time. Of course, there's the Ashkenazi immigration that comes to the United States and also goes to Latin America. At the very end of the 19th century, 1870, 1880, the United States, Argentina become two big magnets for Jews in the Pale of Settlement. Yiddish speakers that when arriving to Argentina will not know anything about the Sephardic past, about those that had arrived with a crypto Jewish identity, and they will think that they are starting from scratch. And when they arrive to the United States, those Yiddish speakers also will believe that they are starting from scratch, even though Emma Lazarus, a part Ashkenazi Jew, will be welcoming them with the new Colossus written in order to be engraved in the Statue of Liberty, in the plaque of the pedestal of the Statue of Liberty. That is, the Sephardic Jews were already here. I think it's a fascinatingly complex relationship, the one that Jews and Latinos have in the United States. There are points of encounter and points of division, political identities that can be forged as partnerships. But it's very important also to keep in mind that just as there are very different types of Jews, Ashkenazim and Sephardim and Mizrahim and Israelis that might leave Israel and live in the diaspora with the rest of us, there are very different types of Latinos. You are a Puerto Rican, I'm Mexican, there are Cubans, there are Dominicans, and each of those groups within the Latino community represent another vision, another approach, and might even be considered to be seen as separate. Not all Latinos want to be seen as Latinos, as a conglomerate, as a kind of a corporation. They want to be seen as Cuban Americans or as Mexican Americans or as Puerto Ricans in the island and or in the mainland. I think that the crucial part, and I wrap this thing now, Ray, to go back to you, is that there is much that the two communities don't know about each other, the histories that they share or not share. And I think it is high time for the two communities to be more dedicated to understanding that history in order to find those commonalities, those bridges, those points of encounter.
You know, the cultural detritus, you might say, that gives signals that there was some sort of contact. You hear something like Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass. You hear Edie Gourmet singing with Trio Los Panchos, which was a huge album. And it was very funny. I was talking with Jewish friends of about my age who were surprised that I had heard Edie Gourmet a lot when I was a kid. And I explained to them the whole background of the absolutely massive album, Anoche los Tres, with Edie Gourmet. Edie Gourmet sings songs of love with Trios Los Panchos, and how that was sort of the background music of my childhood, where every household had a copy of that record. Edie Gourmet, a Sephardi of Syrian origin, spoke Ladino, the Yiddish of the Spanish-speaking Jews, and had a, much better than Nat King Cole, had beautiful Spanish pronunciation, singing those lovely old boleros. And it was such a funny thing to hear this guy be so surprised that I was such an Edie Gourmet fan. But if you went to the Catskills in the late 50s and early 60s, you learned how to mambo and cha-cha, and bands that played at the great salsa dance ballrooms of Manhattan would go up to the mountains in the summer to basically play Latin music for Jews. And yet back in their neighborhoods, what was left of the original Jewry? shuls that were now Asamblea de Dios, Iglesia Pentecostal, Iglesia Bautista, this Jewish cultural deposit left in their new lives in the United States, a physical manifestation in Hebrew over the door, a house of prayer for all people. And yet here they were shouting, clapping, praying to Jesus on Sunday. It is, again, that intimacy, but in a weird, disjointed way that strangers sometimes have. They bump into each other casually on the street, but don't really know each other's lives.
I love that album by Eddie Gourmet. I listen to it quite frequently. I love her pronunciation in Spanish, and you could sometimes just in very scattered moments sense that Spanish is not her native language, that there is a Ladino palpitating in the background. We can go beyond in terms of music, Ray. As you know, there is a hybrid, mixed communion right now of salsa that can be sung in Yiddish or in Hebrew, or Ladino songs that have been turned into rancheras. The beauty of this country is the possibility of both paying tribute to the traditions that we have and renewing those traditions through the mix of immigrant cultures that are always fertilizing who we are. My own son is a DJ, and he uses the background of the Jewish music that he learned from when he was a little boy with the house music and with salsa and merengue and mariachis and so on to create something that is absolutely new. I think that that newness is something that is defining the 21st century. I think that if these two parallel immigrant groups were almost not seeing each other, only on vacation, as you're saying, in the Catskills, or only when they were not fully acknowledging their presence, I think that what we're seeing right now is the full recognition that these two minorities are meant to play as crucial, if not a more important role in this 21st century, and that it is fundamental to be able to cross partnerships and be able to find each other. I think for a long time in the 60s, with the civil rights movement, there was a desire by Jews to understand what the African-American experience was about. There was an involvement in social justice that was crucial for the two minorities to merge. And I think that what we're seeing right now in young people, young Jews and young Latinos, is an encounter that has much to do with social justice, with marches, with activism, to change issues of immigration. Latinos are now at the bottom of the scale. They need help. They themselves are finding strategies, new tools in order to be able to make their message come across. But this is never done alone, because there are no communities, no immigrant waves that are pure and separated from each other. We marry each other, we live with each other, and we create new cultures with each other. And I think that's what Jews and Latinos are doing in Miami, in LA, in Chicago, in New York, in Houston, in the major metropolitan centers that you're talking about. And they are doing it in media, in literature, in cuisine. Wonderful new dishes that are emerging that are the result of Mexican or Cuban or Puerto Rican or Dominican cuisine mixed with all sorts of Jewish elements, or vice versa. It is an exciting moment. It's really a moment to reckon with.
One of the great challenges for American Jewry in the first century after mass immigration, let's say from 1875 to 1975, was sort of to solve the riddle of America. Who are we? How do we fit in? How do we remain ourselves and still be part of this thing? How can we be fully accepted as full fellow citizens and still hold on to what we want to about ourselves? That's an immigrant predicament in any case, and certainly there are many Latinos facing some of those same questions. Was it different if the boat turned left and you went to Buenos Aires, if you got off in Veracruz and ended up in Mexico City, if you got off in Havana, was the question, because the size of the community was relatively much different, because there was a different reception in largely Catholic countries from Protestant majority America, was the challenge of Latin American Jewry different from the one here in the United States?
Dramatically different, Ray. And the reason can be explained with a single line, and that is, or a single concept, and that is the American dream. America, even in spite of the atrocious, calamitous moment we are in the relentless anti-immigrant rhetoric, has been a country that has welcomed immigrants and has seen them as the revitalizing force that pushes this nation forward. The innovation, the desire to have a better future is, to a large extent, pushed by those new immigrants that want to see themselves as part of this tapestry. Latin America doesn't have a Mexican dream or an Argentinian dream or a Cuban dream. There is less social mobility, economic mobility. If you are born in the lower income, you are likely to die or hardly move. There is no sense that there is a melting pot, a way for people to interact. Minorities retain the sense of being minorities, even after generations, 2, 3, 4 generations after my grandparents arrived. We are still living in certain neighborhoods in Mexico City or in Guadalajara or in Monterrey, interacting with other Jews or other members of small minorities. I think it's very important to remember that to the United States, Jews arrived at a moment when immigrants, when we were suffering, I'm particularly talking about Ashkenazi Jews, Yiddish speakers, when poverty was devastating, pogroms were at a height, anti-Semitism was widespread, and the hope of any type of better future was right in front of the eyes of our ancestors. We came by boat, and we were welcomed by the symbol of a Statue of Liberty that said, "Give me your tired, your poor, your hollow masses, yearning to breathe free." Latinos have not come in a single wave. Latinos, many have been here in this country even before the country started, even before 1776. Many lived in the Southwest, were part of what was New Spain, Mexico today. They didn't move, the country moved. They did not immigrate, the country enwrapped them. There are many others that have arrived at different moments, and there has been a back and forth, chain immigration, going back to Puerto Rico or to El Salvador or to Honduras or to Mexico. That means that the cut with the past has not been as sharp. The umbilical cord remains, and the dialogue with Mexico or with Cuba or with Puerto Rico or with Venezuela is one that moves on into your living room, into the next generation, into the language that you speak. Jews are a successful minority. Jews made it in. We are the mainstream. Perhaps among young Jews today, there is the sense that something was too successful and that we're missing an ethnic past that we want to recover. Latinos, we are still in the process of arrival. We're still in the process of making it to the mainstream, of being accepted. There is much that is anti-Latino in this country that needs to be fought. We did not come, many of us, by boat. We crossed the border, swimming a river, dying in a desert. There was no Statue of Liberty welcoming us. There was no Ellis Island. There were helicopters and militia and dogs barking at us. It's a very different experience. And the experience marks the way you define yourself in this country. Latinos love the United States. They want that opportunity. There are many hurdles, and I think it is upon us Jews that have been so successful to open our arms and our hearts to be able to help those that are now struggling to make it the way we have.
Has the removal of social sanction over time made the discovery of, the investigation of a crypto-Jewish or converso past more fun, more interesting, more mysterious, more enticing? There was a time in the past where your social standing, even your life itself, could be endangered by acknowledging in an open way a Jewish past. That's long gone. And so people now saying, oh yes, my ancestors are Jews, is that made more possible by a sort of change in the temperature?
I'm fascinated, as you and I have talked, and I have expressed it to you, by the phenomenon of conversos and crypto-Jews all over Latin America, but in particular in the Southwest, in Santa Fe and in Albuquerque, in El Paso. The life that crypto-Jews have experienced for centuries is a subject that really captures my imagination. I think that crypto-Jews are the Jews of the Jews. They have been isolated. They have seen themselves sometimes being attacked by old sites, not recognized by their Catholic siblings and parents, and also not recognized by us Jews, kind of somewhere in the middle, lost without a sense of belonging. Some of them have been able to come out. We use the frequent image of coming out for many other identities. And there is the coming out of crypto-Jews as well. It is hype and hip and attractive to be a Jew today. 100 years ago, it wouldn't have been, it wasn't, to announce that your family was actually secretly keeping Shabbat or performing the high holidays in the darkness because you didn't want to be targeted by the larger community. The fact that it is more open today doesn't diminish the misery, the difficulties that many crypto-Jews have had, and in no way actually reduces the tension that exists in crypto-Jewish families in the Southwest between those siblings, and I talk in the book about many of them, those siblings that say that they have recognized their Jewish past and they want to convert, and those that say you're inventing all this. We were never Jews. This is a figment of your imagination. The tension between some of them affiliating themselves with Israel or not affiliating themselves with Israel or connecting with Ashkenazi communities nearby. It is a perilous, a challenging path. And if anybody has retained the secrecy of what it means to be a Jew against all odds in the United States, it is the model of the crypto-Jewish families that are admirable and really tortured within.
But it also highlights the modern privilege of self-reinvention that religious tolerance offers. Earlier in our history, it might have been much more counterintuitive to choose to be Jewish if you didn't have to be. If it was strictly optional and you were a baptized person who just found out that your ancestors were Jews. It's kind of a gift of the 21st century, I think.
I agree, and maybe not only of the 21st century, it is a gift of the United States. That is what immigration is. It's about looking for a new life. It's about enormous sacrifices. It's about sensing that you are nowhere for a long time until slowly you find that nowhere is somewhere and that somewhere is home, a new home. But it is about what you were saying. Immigrants are who they are because they can reinvent themselves. They can find new names. Jews have changed their names in the process of immigration so many times, and it is done for a variety of reasons. But at the core of it is the fact that they are somebody new, that they will identify by others differently, that they can, if they want, connect with their ancestry, look back at their genealogy, but they can also say, I'm an American, I'm starting anew, I'm building myself from scratch. And that is, I hope still is, Ray, what this country has always been about. You can dispense of a past, a family past, an ancestry, and start from scratch, and or you can use that family past as a springboard to say, here I am, it connects me to my roots, but I am also new.
When the Kingdom of Spain released a list of family names inviting people to examine their own family pasts and perhaps apply for Spanish citizenship, my family name, Suarez, which is derived from an archaic term for a swineherd, was on the list because it was often used as cover for Jewish families that wanted to efface or erase their own family past by taking on the name swineherd. When you're davening, you won't look up and see me at your elbow, Ilan, on any coming Friday night. But it is an interesting wrinkle in this crazy world that we have. Let's go to comments and questions from the floor. Evan writes, my great uncle Sam couldn't come directly from Russia due to quotas. He immigrated to Havana, became a waiter, learned Spanish. When he rejoined the family in the USA, he stayed in the Bronx when it became Latinx because he was comfortable with the culture and knew the language. And my uncle Herbie married Evelina, a Jew from Paraguay. Anonymous attendee asked, are Latinx Jews really that rare? I thought that Argentina and Venezuela were more receptive of Jews fleeing Europe and the Nazis. My grandfather was the only one of his family to make it to the US. His father and 4 siblings went to Argentina in the 1930s. What do you have to say?
Well, let me start with the second comment, a wonderful comment. Latin America has roughly 450 million people, out of which approximately 500,000 is Jewish. Probably we don't even reach that 500,000, 500,000. Argentina has the largest concentration of Jews, maybe close to 250 to 300,000. Buenos Aires, La Plata. Argentina was a center of Jewish immigration for Ashkenazim. In the 19th century, there were colonies that were sponsored by the Alliance Israélite Universelle, by Baron Maurice de Hirsch, and Jews and Gauchos lived together. The fact is that many Latin Americans never come face to face with a Jew in their lives. They might see a stereotype on television. They might hear about something in the news. But the Jews in Latin America, because of the metabolism of how societies work, keep to themselves. Several countries are different. Argentina, Brazil, different. There's much more engagement in the open culture, but it's a very different dynamic than the one in the United States, where you can have a show like Seinfeld on television, or a director like Mel Brooks that is mainstream. There are directors and programs in Latin America that have Jewish content, but there is a far more limited number. I think that
your father was a well-known soap opera star
yeah.
in Mexico and a well-known personality on television. He didn't play Jews, did he?
He hardly ever played Jews. He did one telenovela, Rebelde, that he was thrilled to be invited to do the very first Shabbat on television. And this is in the late 90s. They actually filmed that episode in my father's house, and he was thrilled. It was the very first time that a Shabbat service could be seen on a primetime Mexican television at 9 o'clock at night. It was a very popular soap opera about a group of rebellious youngsters. It's a very different experience. In Latin America, you feel you're Jewish often first. and then you're Mexican, or you are Cuban, or you are Chilean. I don't want to speak for the 500,000 Jews that live there. Everybody experiences it in a different way. There is also far lower numbers in terms of mixed marriages, of assimilation. The experience of the first speaker that you mentioned is a very powerful one. The very same neighborhoods that you were describing have seen those walls, the waves of different ethnic and immigrant groups change, and where Jews live, now Dominicans live, or where African Americans live, then now Mexicans or Colombians or Hondurans live. It is the walls that are the witnesses. But in that encounter of marriage that he talked about, in that sense that you are with others, it's a very similar experience to mine. My ancestors wanted to come to the United States in the 1910s and 1920s. Immigration quotas were such that it was impossible. They were stationed in Cuba, they were stationed in Central America. Finally, some moved to Chicago and to Long Island. Others stayed in Mexico and build a life. And I think the difference, at least in the way that I've discussed it with the many folks that I interviewed and came across in the book, The Seventh Heaven, is that Latin American Jews feel that they live in a rented home, whereas American Jews feel they live in their own private property. And that I think is a very important difference. You might live tomorrow from Latin America if things get bad. If things get worse than they get in the United States, we're always saying that after this election, we're going to move to Canada. And Canada always registers a very limited number of those that actually make the jump.
Richard asks, do you think these very complex processes of acculturation or even syncretism are regional in the U.S.? Is it possible that in earlier periods, the regionalism was more important than it is today?
No doubt. I think that the idea that we have today, that in order to be an American, you assimilate, and depending on the time, you can be negatively described, as I have been, as an assimilationist, because you give up your immigrant culture, is not one that has been present all the time. This concept of the melting pot is a very 19th century concept. It really played out in the early 20th century. The idea of mixed marriages, the idea that a Jew and a Black person could marry just 50 years ago was condemned. And we celebrate it today, and that is a major highlight. The way we're celebrating, the way Latinos can jump out of their own enclaves and enter the middle class. But Latinos are taking longer to enter the middle class than Jews did, or that other immigrant groups have done. That is worrisome to me. There is also a different atmosphere in the United States right now. You don't give up your immigrant culture the way you gave it up in the 20s or 30s or 40s in order to embrace American culture. Now that you can be an in-between, a hybrid, a Mexican hyphen American, and live in that hyphen, that is a change of the cultural climate.
As for whether it's celebrated or not, I mean, I guess I'll have you talk to my mother-in-law about that. Why did those fleeing the pogroms, Amy asks, and fleeing the Nazis, end up mostly in Argentina and Brazil, opposed to other Latin American countries? Or am I mistaken? Is it because there were already Jews there after the Spanish Inquisition?
It's a very interesting story. In the second half of the 19th century, the Argentinian political elite was convinced that the road for the nation to become modern, to embrace modernity, was by isolating the gauchos and other indigenous population, and by bringing in immigrants from Europe, particularly white immigrants. They invited Italians and they invited Jews. In spite of anti-Semitism, in spite of anti-Italian rhetoric and movements, the idea by figures like Domingo Faustino Sarmiento, one of the most important presidents of the 19th century in Argentina, the author of a book called Facundo, Civilization or Barbarism, was that you have to isolate the gaucho and replace it with an immigrant. And so Argentina opened its doors. It was less populated, had less of an indigenous past, meaning native Aztecs, Nahuatls, and Quechuas, and Mayans, than those in Central America or Mexico. And the solution for those politicians was to whiten the nation, whitening it through immigration. There was a rather small number of Spanish Jews that actually went to Argentina. Many had gone to Peru or to Mexico, the two main centers of cultural life during the colonial period. So Argentina was seen as a distant location. Nobody really wanted to go there. And in order to populate it and to bring European culture to that country and to modernize it, they wanted to see themselves as the new France, the new Germany. It was through immigration at the end of the 19th century and of the 20th century, which coincided with the need of Jews from the Pale of Settlement, from Eastern Europe, Russia, to find a new location at that moment of desperation, the emergence of nationalism. And Argentina became a place of Jewish life, mainly as a result of those laws that were inviting the immigrants, Yiddish-speaking, from Europe.
Ilan will be part of another conversation hosted by these same organizations next week involving anti-Semitism in Latin America, and I hope you join him for that. Let's make time for one more, okay? Razel asks, can we compare crypto-Judaism to Latinx communities who hide their Yoruba or indigenous practices due to Catholic colonization? Interesting question.
Fascinating question. Razel, I have no doubt you should. There is a model of sacrifice, endurance, persistence in crypto-Jews, just as there has been this desire by the Afro-Cubans, Afro-Puerto Ricans to retain their culture, sometimes being forced to hide it or to put it aside in order to be embraced by the larger community. I don't know who serves as a model, one or the other. What I do know is that, as you were saying, there are many similarities, and that in and of itself is a point of encounter, this porous area where Jews and Latinos can find out that they share a lot.
For those of you who aren't familiar with sort of the underpinning of Razel's question, immigrants to the United States, certainly in places like South Florida and the New York metropolitan area, often practice a form of West African religion which was hidden from Catholic authorities after conversion by their use of Catholic symbolic language, Catholic language, in order to hide the Yoruba practices underneath. Fascinating part of American religion. Ilan, always great to talk to you. Always great to see you, even in this weird way. Someday we'll actually see each other in person again.
And embrace. Un fuerte abrazo.
Right. And thank you to all the organizations involved for having me aboard.
Thank you so much, Ilan and Ray. This was amazing. Thank you for your time and your expertise. I know we're seeing lots of questions and chats. The audience is so interested in what you're having to say. We've recorded the remaining questions that we didn't get to, and we'll see if we can do something about getting some of them answered later. We hope you'll join us, as Ray had mentioned, in 1 week, next Thursday, for our conversation with Dr. Stavans again, as he joins in conversation with Andres Bokoini, the president and CEO of Jewish Funders Network, to discuss anti-Semitism in Latin America and other issues that are impacting the Latin American Jewish communities. You can find out more information about that in our chat or on the Jewish Book Council website. Again, Ilan, Ray, thank you so much. This was wonderful. I love that we went from borders to Catskills and everywhere in between. And everyone, thank you for joining us. Have a good day.
Hasta luego. Gracias.